Hello, everybody. My name is Lainey, and this is my channel, gingerreadslainey, and this is the third episode of the Noveltea Show, where today we are going to talk about all about our writing process and how we've kind of changed as writers to where we are at now. So, my name is Lainey, obviously, and then Alexa, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Alexa Dunn. I am a YA author. My debut novel is Brightly Burning, which is Jane Eyre in space. My next one comes out next year. It's The Stars We Steal. And my channel is just Alexa Dunn. I talk a lot about the industry and all that kind of jazz.
And hi, I am Kat from the channel Katie Tastic, and I make booktube videos and also authortube videos.
Okay, so since we are talking about writing process, I want to first mention that if you really want your question to be answered, make sure you use the Twitter handle #NovelteaShow. We'll be checking that one to answer the most burning questions because the chat kind of goes kind of fast. So our first question is kind of our first book experience, what we kind of did to finish the book and what our process was like for that. So for me, my first book was a Red Riding Hood retelling, and I wrote it in November of 2014 for NaNoWriMo. It was the first time I won NaNoWriMo, and it took me a very long time to finish it completely, the first draft, as well as to edit it. It took like over a year for me to do. And I ended up shelving it in 2016 after I tried querying it. So my process was very long. It was also the first book. I feel like you have to kind of get that out of the way because now I feel like I'm a lot quicker and just a lot better overall. So that was my first book experience.
So mine, well, we'll talk about my first novel attempt. So that was 2008 or 2009, and it was a YA dystopia because of course it was. I only got to like 20,000 words. And I can compare this to my first actual novel experience of finishing a book. That was one that I started in 2012 and I finished it in early 2013. And like the big thing for me, like process-wise, growth-wise, was my first novel attempt. I got stuck because I wanted feedback. I wanted critique partners to tell me how it was going. And I also was trying to be an outliner and didn't know yet that I was a pantser. That was a problem too. But basically, the first one I actually finished was a YA time travel novel. I pitched it as Election meets Doctor Who. And the big thing was just, I told myself it was okay if it sucked. And I pushed through, and kind of process-wise, it was figuring out, like, discovering pantsing. That was like magic for me. And I actually was really fortunate. I queried that and I actually got an agent off of my first completed novel, but it didn't sell. We can talk more about that.
So my first book writing experience is almost an opposite of Alexa's, because I was discovering that I was a plotter and I tried to pants my first book. Like I had a very loose outline. Like it wasn't until I'd been writing for a couple years that I sort of like developed my intense 3-act outlining process. So yeah, the first book, it took me like 9 months to get through my first draft. And that was because I was writing in chronological order, which I cannot do anymore whatsoever. So yeah, it took 9 months, and I also edited as I went. So it was chronological order. Like I would briefly outline like what was happening immediately next. And then, yeah, it was just editing as I go, and it took a long time to finish. Well, like 9 months to finish, even though now I can like draft during like a NaNoWriMo session. Like I prefer to fast draft and just like get that initial story out as much as possible. So yeah, a lot of the first book was just like learning my own writing process, because that's what a lot of like learning to be a writer is like what works for you specifically, and also what works for you and the specific project you're working on, because it does tend to change a lot.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring up editing as you go. You put the term to it that I was stumbling and trying to say. That was a huge thing for me. Editing as I went was bad, and I had to stop doing that to actually finish something. So that was a huge learning curve for me. Not second guessing myself constantly and going back and combing through things. Because for me, that was how I stalled out on, I mean, I mentioned the one YA dystopia, and I technically stalled out on a few books before I finished one.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the community and how we kind of viewed it with our first book, because Alexa, you kind of mentioned that a little bit when you were talking about it. But I think one thing for me is that I didn't have any critique partners. I didn't send it off to anybody, and that really hurt me. But also, I can't believe this, but I queried without having anybody having read my book at all. So that was like a major mistake for me.
We all
But
do it.
yeah, I've definitely learned. But yeah, definitely that was the number one thing I feel like was my huge mistake with my first book.
I mean, even I think that's a really common mistake with first books, because even I did have I think 1 or 2 people read it before I queried it, but like they gave me feedback and I didn't really listen to it. I was just like, yeah, but I want to query now, so
Yeah.
I'm just gonna query now.
Well, and finding the right critique partners or writing community, it is a process and it does take time. So the CPs I had or tried to have when I was first writing books or trying to write books, I didn't know at the time, but they were the wrong CPs, like meaning they couldn't really give me what I needed. One of them, who's a longtime friend of mine, was the closest to being like pretty good at it. And she's the person who gave me like the critical note on my first completed novel. She told me it was boring for the first 2/3, which sounds mean, but really helped me. I was like, oh, that's really good information. Nothing happens for 2/3 of the book. But other than that, it wasn't until I completed the first book and was querying it that I found really good CPs, that I found my writing community. And I found my writing community through like blog contests in that like area. And since we're just talking about kind of process and leveling up, it wasn't until I found the right CPs that I got exponentially better. Like as proud of as I am of my first book, like it's nothing compared to subsequent books because I found better writing community. It's more important than people realize, but I will also say I do know some unicorns who also queried without CPs, and they probably shouldn't tell people because it's not fair because some of them are published and they did okay, but they're the exception. But they're fine now because they have me. I'm like, you need a CP.
I like that you oh, sorry. I was saying I like that you grab your tea right as you're like
it's coffee.
I was going to say that also, one thing we're talking about, like critique partners and how they can help you. Critiquing other people's work also helps me become a better writer. Like being able, like learning to assess and like try to diagnose like what's working and what's not. And since you have that like degree of removal when you're critiquing someone else's work, then you can kind of like train yourself to keep an eye out for that stuff. And then you start to notice it more in your own work. And you're like, oh, that's telling, or that's like a really info dumpy paragraph. Like you learn how to like critique your own work better by critiquing other people's.
Agree completely.
Yeah. And then kind of on the topic of querying, did you guys always know that you wanted to try to publish this first book that you wrote? Like at what point did you, when you were writing it, did you think, I'm going to try to get this published?
For me, from the start, I'm a very ambitious slither claw. From the first time when I decided I wanted to write a book, so it was 2008, so I was 26 or 27. I was always gunning for traditional publishing, so it was always like what I can finish and polish, I want an agent. So I always knew, and it's a little bit arrogant, but that confidence is what pushed me through a draft. So no regrets. Yeah, I was very calculated.
I don't have a lot of clear memories about it because like at that time I knew so little about publishing and traditional publishing, self-publishing, all of it. Like I had in mind, like I want to traditionally publish, but I also didn't know everything that came along with that. And that's why, like I had that naivety that a new writer has where like you have just so much confidence overflowing because you haven't had like that reality check yet. And then like after I queried like my fourth book and didn't get an agent, and like that like really hit me, and that's made me think like maybe I don't want to be traditionally published or like published at all. Like I don't know, my whole opinion on getting published or not has like evolved a lot based on how much I know about the publishing industry. And like I've come back around to like, I do want to pursue publishing again, but I feel a lot more like informed about that decision now.
Yeah, I think, well, I can't even remember, but I feel like BookTube really pushed me, like having my channel, and I'm like, I think I could probably get this published because I've always been writing, but I never really seriously wrote until I guess high school. But then I feel like college kind of took over. So I could never finish a book during college. So I never wrote like really for me during college. It was until after I graduated where I'm like, okay, I'm going to start writing again for real. And I think BookTube is what helped me realize that like I want to pursue this particular book, even though it was completely wrong. I can look back at that now and be like, no. But I think that's kind of common. The first book, some people are very, very lucky they get representation on their first book, but I think for the vast majority of people, that's not the case. And I feel like I was one of those people that needed to learn a lot more about the craft.
Yeah.
But I learned so much through the first book.
And I should say, I forgot, one of the reasons I knew I wanted an agent, I knew I wanted traditional publishing, my inspiration, because I came from fandom, and I never thought I could write a novel until I was in Harry Potter fandom. I was like, oh, I'm not terrible at this, yay. Though I could never write anything long, so I thought, I'll never write a novel. But honestly, seeing Cassie Clare, Sarah Reese Brennan, and Naomi Novik transition was a huge inspiration for me, and specifically Sarah Reese Brennan. And like she recommended Kristen Nelson's blog. Like that was kind of my entry into like the big wacky world of publishing. And that's definitely what sparked my interest. So yeah, it's all coming back to me now.
Yeah, all the memories, all the trauma.
Well, and those are the halcyon days of YA blowing up. Oh, how things have changed.
Yeah, like I met my critique partners through like publishing blogs back in the day. It's like 2008 to 2010, 11, like agent blogs and aspiring author blogs were like the thing.
Were you on Miss Snark's First Victim at all?
I read that all the time. I met my critique partners through Nathan Bransford First Paragraph contest. So, but we don't have as many of those resources around anymore.
Now, instead, things have shifted to the contest culture through Twitter and everything. But also, I think now we're developing a community on YouTube. Things have changed. It just doesn't work on blogs like that anymore.
Yeah, like the author blogs have shifted to AuthorTube channels.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
And yes, Naomi Novik wrote Harry Potter fan fiction, catching up with the chat. Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yes. So many people wrote fanfic. You don't even know.
It's like specific, like Harry Potter fanfic. Like that. I feel like it's
my world. There are authors who I know wrote fanfic who I'm pretty sure were in Harry Potter, but I don't know who they were. And it drives me crazy. It's like secrets.
And then after like we queried and we didn't get an agent, or Alexa, you did, but when did we decide to kind of shelve that project? Like when did we decide that it's time to move on?
28 editors said no. I have all my rejections. It's great. No, basically, I was on sub for a year and a half and I just got no's. Too late for the market, not good enough to break out. That's a great thing to hear. Just not right for me, bad timing, wrong fit. And it kind of, so it's not that I decided, well, I guess I did decide to shelve it. I mean, I was the one who said, let's not sub this anymore because I was working on something new. But that kicks off so many feelings. Like even to this day, I wonder, like, was getting an agent on my first book a mistake? Like, was it even any good? Because I have so many feelings. I'm better now, though, so it's fine.
Those kind of questions sort of go along with you no matter what. Like, I have those same, like, I wish I had gotten an agent. Like, how different my life would have been if I'd gotten an agent on that first book. But then I also think, like, holy crap, I'm so glad I didn't have an agent. I'm so glad that first book, like, nobody read it. I want my debut to be, I don't want people to say, like, it's good for a debut. I want
or good for a young person if you're young.
Which is another thing, like the age in publishing, like especially YA publishing. Like you got to be young to get your breakout as a teen author. There's a lot of pressure on that, and I really felt that. So like I felt like such a huge failure when my first book didn't get published. And now I'm like, thank God.
Same.
Yeah. I still feel that about the age thing. Like, I'm running out of time. I gotta finish this.
I'm way older than both of you. You're fine.
I take comfort in finding the stories of like authors whose careers I admire who were my age. Like Brandon Sanderson was 30 when his first novel was published. So like I'm turning 31 in a couple months. So like I'm late, but it's fine.
Kat, I got a book deal at, how old was I? 33, and my book came out when I was 34.
Okay, cool. I have a couple stay on pace there.
But I mean, I feel the same things. Honestly, we could do a whole show on age and writing and YA because things have changed a lot. It's interesting. It's very interesting.
Yeah, so I decided to shelve mine like right before NaNoWriMo of 2016 because I'm like, I don't think this, like, it wasn't really getting anywhere with querying. Like I did, surprisingly, for not having anybody read it or anybody look at my query, had agent interest, but I'm like, all the fulls were coming back as no's. And then I was like really thinking, I'm like, do I really want this to be my debut? And the answer was like, no. So I decided to, like, that's when I kind of decided to shelve it because I feel like I felt like what I wanted to create next was way better. And that's what I wanted to shift my gears towards. But yeah.
Well, do we want to talk about that? How do you know when to shelve a project? Because I think that's an essential part of the process. Every time you shelve a book, especially the ones you love with your whole heart, you level up as a writer. I firmly believe that. Mm. So for you, it was, I don't want this to be my debut. And I would imagine, I'll ask, how many agents had you queried at that point?
Oh, I think it was around like maybe 30.
So you did, I never queried more than 30 people because my thinking was if I had to get deep into my query list, I didn't want to settle for an agent. I would rather write a better book. That sounds so snobby. I'm so sorry, but I would rather write a better book and get the top agent that I wanted than settle on a lesser book because how you debut really matters.
I don't think that sounds snobby at all. Like that's strategy.
I feel bad.
You know, like honestly, I feel like bad agent. And not to say that like there's only 30 good agents or so like if you make it for sci-fi, for your specific list and for sci-fi and for who represents similar voices and stuff like that. Like I don't think I've ever queried more than 30 agents for one project either. There's one project that I sent exactly 2 queries and I got 1 request. But I ended up like shelving it because I didn't want it to be my debut novel. It was like a middle grade YA sort of border, more middle grade, and I wanted my debut to be YA. So like I just was like, yeah, this isn't the right book. It was a fun like palette cleanser in between. It was like a 60,000 word like fun adventure MG. And so it was like a nice palette cleanser between some YA books that I was working on. But yeah, I shelved it because I didn't want it to be my debut.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Kat, I think you've got an echo.
I'm refreshing.
Thank you. This happened last time too. So I'll just jump in. So I got an agent on my first book. I was very lucky. I was in a contest and one of the agents from the contest ended up offering. But all of the other agents who had my full said no, which I still wonder about to this day. Like it's like they knew it wasn't ready. But I wrote another book, a second book. I spent 1.5 years on it. I was so proud of it. It was the book of my heart. It's what I wanted to work on. And my agent just didn't get it. And she just, it was a whole thing. And we amicably decided to part ways. I know that sounds like bullshit, but it's true. Like it really was like, we had conversations about it. We're just like, this isn't going to work. Cause I was moving more into genre fiction. And cause my first book kind of straddled the line between genre and contemporary. So long story short, I had to query my second book after leaving my first agent. And I think I sent 22 or 23 queries. And so for me, deciding to shelve it was, I already knew that it was in a tricky genre, which was part of the problem with my first agent that it was basically in what was considered at the time a dead genre. It's not dead anymore. I'm actually really kind of excited about that. Except I've moved on. But so I knew that there was only a small subset of agents who actually repped my kind of writing, who had the wherewithal to sell a dead genre. And I basically said to myself, if they don't pick it up, I'm moving on. That sounds really zen and great, but actually it was emotional turmoil and it was awful and I almost gave up on writing. But that was it for me. It was the whole, like, I don't want to go for the second or third string agent on a book that's going to be an uphill climb no matter what. Because I wanted to debut well. That was really important to me.
Yeah. So let's move on to how we have leveled up in terms of our writing process. We can first start with, sorry, I have like a million tabs open. Mostly with how we have been writing with our revisions. Like, how have we leveled up in like our revision standpoint?
For me, it's been a lot of like self-learning. Like, I really love craft books, so I love reading those. And even if they don't exactly mesh with like my own process, like I can at least learn something from them. And also things like I took a creative writing class at my local community college, and that was really great because, you know, it wasn't too expensive as far as like classes or courses go, and it was like workshop style. So we got to submit work and have everyone in the class give us feedback on it, which I found very useful as like a change from my critique partners who are so tapped into like YA world and the YA publishing industry, to have like people of all different ages and backgrounds like reading my stuff and giving feedback on that. So something like that was really helpful to me.
For me, in terms of leveling up through revision, is by having to rewrite massive chunks of several books, I learned not to make the same mistakes twice. So after the first book, when nothing happened for the first 2/3 of the book, I basically realized that what I had as my third act twist needed to be more like my midpoint. And I actually moved it up even sooner than the midpoint. And I haven't made that mistake since. That was like the lesson learned of shit has to happen in a book, basically. That you can't write a whole book based around something cool you want to have happen in a third act. The entire book has to have stuff going on constantly. That was a huge learning lesson for me. And then just this is the technical stuff, but my agent giving me advice on how to fix pacing changed my life. She just told me something that's so stupid and simple, but it hadn't occurred to me, which was just shorten everything. You don't want to have really long paragraphs, really long sentences, because people trip over them and they're more likely to stop reading. So when something feels slow, it's not necessarily about changing the book, because I was freaking out about having to rewrite my first act of Brightly Burning. I was like, I don't want to do it. It's all necessary. I can't. She said, just make everything shorter. Just cut a little bit in each different place. And that totally changed my writing. It's essentially getting better with the economy of your writing to improve pacing. I don't know, it just blew my mind. And now I'm better at doing it in drafts.
I've heard something similar to that. I want to say Brandon Sanderson, that something that he does in a revision pass is he'll take every chapter and cut it by 10%. Like, if it's
great advice.
Words, you have to chop 200 words, and you start to like reword sentences without like extra filler words, and like you're saying the exact same thing but with 3 less words, and that adds up, and it really makes it nice and tighter.
So that's the main way in which I feel I've leveled up. I think I've really leveled up at conflict, tension, and pacing, because I've had to fix those things in revision.
Yeah, so for me, I think the writing is rewriting thing didn't really sink into me until I started my second book. Like, my first book, I do feel like I did do some good revising, but I feel like the majority of it was rearranging words it wasn't a deep dive into a real revision. And I think that is a huge mistake that a lot of first-time writers or first-time book writers kind of make, is the first book. I mean, just revising in general just needs, you're doing just as much work as you did for when you were drafting it. And I always never felt that way. I always felt like my revisions were the easy part. And like now I feel like that's so different.
The easy part.
Yeah.
When you're with your first book, like revisions were just cleaning up the grammar a little bit, and, like, you know, polishing sentences a little bit, not making big changes like, oh, this needs to be in a completely different location, and this character is actually these two characters combined now, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then how, when we talk about like resources in the community, how have we leveled up? I think one of the biggest things, is, at least for me, is that I now reach out to people. I'm not scared. And we kind of talked about that last episode when we were talking about not wanting to share our work with other people and how to kind of get over that. And that's something that I really needed to learn. And I'm glad I did.
It's funny, for me, it's the opposite. Just because of coming from fanfic, where you would basically almost co-write your work with betas, meaning your betas were there 24/7 and you could always bounce stuff off each other. I've had to get used to writing by myself and trusting my own gut to push through. I've gotten progressively better at that, draft to draft. But also the irony is, like, I had to learn to completely divorce myself from that. But then I got great critique partners. And now I do have, it feels like I have kind of that beta support again. But I try not to use it too much as a crutch, because I can do it. I can.
Yeah, I feel like I'm kind of still learning this stage, because like my previous critique partners from like back in 2008, 2009, my like blogging days, I'm not really in contact with them anymore. And I went through that period of a couple of years where like I didn't want to be published. I didn't want anyone reading my writing. It was like just for me. So I'm like, no one else has really read my writing in quite a while. So I'm nervous about that coming up. Like when I finish this draft of this revision on my book, like I'm going to send it to people and I am already scared.
It is terrifying, honestly. I'm always afraid someone's going to be like, why would you write this garbage? Why?
Yeah. And that's also having like the channel too. I'm just like, I've been talking about writing for so long that like when/if my book ever comes out, like I'm nervous that people are going to be like, she's been talking about writing for like 5 years and she sucks.
That's my biggest fear. I that's why I stopped making writing videos for a long time, because I'm like, because people would be like, what's your cred for like, why should we listen to you? And I'm like, you shouldn't. Like, I don't know. Don't listen to me. I don't know.
Yeah. But someone's always going to dislike what you write. You can't avoid that.
Mm-hmm.
It's about finding people who not only like what you write, but also can give you feedback to help you make the book what you want it to be and not what they think it should be. Like, you know, if they're like, oh, you know, I don't think you should have a love triangle, but like you're going for a good love triangle, then like you need to find a reader who can help you make that a solid love triangle rather than one who wants to get rid of the love triangle kind of thing.
And actually something I do find hilarious, this kind of relates, is the idea among some reviewers, only some, that their negative or scathing reviews are supposed to teach us something about process, that they're supposed to help us become better writers. And I'm like, no, I'm fine. I have critique partners and an editor and an agent. I'm good.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that not a lot of people understand. Like, yeah, reviews are great. I mean, I do reviews, but they're
not to teach me. They're to help other people find books.
Yeah.
Reviews aren't for the writers. They're for other readers. Again, with the love triangle, if some reviewer is like, this book had a love triangle, I hate it, even though that's a negative review, like that might get me to pick it up because I love a good love triangle.
Mm-hmm. And how's that supposed to help a writer?
It doesn't actually teach you anything about writing.
It doesn't help the author, because the author's like, I wanted to do a love triangle. Like that was the point. So
what has been the biggest piece of writing/craft advice you guys have learned over the years?
It's a good question.
Yeah. It's like everything tends to blur together and like over like months and years of my life.
Yeah, I'm not a I love reading craft books person, as you know, but probably the irony of it that had the biggest impact, because I hated the book, is Save the Cat. I really hated that book. But the beat sheet is magic. Like, just like having a name for the moments in a story, that was probably the biggest game changer, not in the sense that it taught me how to do them or where to put them, but it gave me a name for the things that I already kind of knew that I needed to do. So that's probably mine.
I mean, actually, that's almost similar to mine, because like I sort of developed my own like 27-point outlining method that I'd never seen anyone else doing. But I used all these like structure resources to help me develop that, like Save the Cat and just like 3x structure in general. So I just kind of like studied a bunch of different structures and kind of figured out a basic structure template that's like a skeleton, and then you can put any kind of story on it, like contemporary, sci-fi, fantasy. Like, it's just, you know, every story is going to have that, you know, break into the second act and a midpoint and the dark night of the soul. Like, even if you are trying to write 3-act structure, like your book is still probably going to like be very similar to 3-act structure, because it's just natural story flowing that like we put structure on, but like it exists on its own.
We have a question in the chat, two questions from two people that relate. How to find beta readers and critique partners who are qualified or like the right fit, and if we've ever had to fire a CP. I bet we all have stories. So first of all, finding them, that is so hard to answer, I will say, because the answer changes depending on what the writing community is doing at the time. And sometimes it's kismet, it's just luck. So Kat, you found yours on Nathan Bransford's blog. I found some of mine on Miss Snark's First Victim. She did critique partner matching. Other ones, honestly, I'm a weirdo. If I see someone with a really good Twitter pitch, I will DM them, and I have found critique partners that way. Doesn't work for everyone. Reddit, I found critique partners on Reddit. Right now, it could be in the comments of a YouTube video. You can find them in the places where there are communities of people who are kind of a similar aspiring writer level as you, but it's hard. Yeah. And yes, I have had to fire CPs, but I'll let you guys go first with your tips before we come into the colorful stories. You just ghost them. I'm
Honestly, that's what I would. I haven't had to fire CPs. I've only had like I had 2 CPs back in the day when I had like my aspiring author blog, and then I stopped querying and stopped pursuing publication for a long stretch of years, and so I didn't have any CPs. And my 2 CPs actually reached out to me. Like because we all had blogs, like we kind of like met on the agent blogs or like found each other's blogs through, you know, blog tags and stuff like that. But they actually had both reached out to me and were like, hey, let's, you know, exchange like the first 30 pages and see if we vibe together, and then, you know, exchange more from there. And I got so lucky because like I loved both of them. I loved both of their books, and they had like similar but different styles to me that they could help me. And so yeah, I never had to fire them. We just kind of like grew out of touch as like our lives went in different directions. I wasn't writing anymore, so like
usually it is ghosting, which is so mature. I've had it happen at a couple levels. I've been ghosted, and the trouble is, so when you're finding your critique partner, definitely do what Kat said, exchange chapters, but you also need to be upfront about what you actually want. And the problem is that people have very different definitions of constructive criticism. And it can get awkward. Meaning I've had the case where I've done a constructive kind of critical read on a few chapters, and I think I'm really nice. But I'm also not going to lie to you if I think that you're rushing your pacing or that something doesn't feel organic. And some people can't take it and then they don't respond back to me. And then also, I've just had cases where I've worked with a critique partner on one book, but then just kind of timing and schedules and less interest in the next project that they write or less interest from them on the next thing that I write. You just kind of, like with Kat, you just kind of grow apart. And it's not malicious and it's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. So my tips for finding, or at least how I found my critique partner, is through kind of NaNoWriMo. So during Camp NaNoWriMo, I used to do cabins. Like I would invite people to do cabins on Twitter. And so I met my critique partner through that. Like we were kind of mutuals, obviously, because we've been following each other. And then towards the end of Camp NaNoWriMo, I remember I was thinking in my head, I'm like, I need to ask her if she wants to be my critique partner. And then before I did that, because I was nervous to send out a DM, she actually DM'd me and said the same thing. So I'm like, oh, this is perfect. So I'm like, I was just going to message you too. And then we actually did it like the complete backwards way. We both sent each other our complete books. And
that's so nerve-wracking. Oh my God.
I know. And like we laugh about it now. Like we're like, why did we do that? Like, but thankfully it all worked out. And we're like, she's like one of my closest friends now too. But we learned so much about critiquing each other just because that was like our first real critique partner experience. At least it was mine. So I think the first book I critiqued for her wasn't the best critiquing, but I feel like I've now gotten a lot better. Yeah, gotten a lot better at it. And thankfully we've stuck around. And then I found another one through Twitter. After Pitch Wars last year, they had like the CP match hashtag on Twitter. And I saw one that I'm like, oh, I like that pitch. And that one I was kind of forward. I'm like, hey, I like the pitch of your book. Let's swap pages. And we did. And that worked out really well too. So I haven't had too many bad experiences. I did ghost someone.
We've all done it.
Yeah.
I'll also recommend Write On Con. They have forums. And that could be a really good place to find CPs. Way back in the day in 2013, I did a little of that. But I also know friends, contemporaries who have done that in the last few ones. That's in February this year, I believe. And the forums are free. So it's basically finding like-minded individuals in writing communities, liking the sound of their project, especially if it's similar, but of course different to yours, then you'll often kind of gel. Also, I will say something for non-reciprocal CPing. I have had plenty of cases where I've just wanted to read someone's book and I've CP'd them and didn't expect them to reciprocate. And to Kat's earlier point, that teaches me just as much about my own writing process, even if I never get notes from them. So there's value in it. And I also enjoy it. It's also why I do mentoring. So there's, if you really like reading and editing, essentially like doing edit letters, that can really level up your writing process. The more you read and learn to spot issues and articulate not just what is wrong, but why it's wrong. And then even come up with some hows, like how would I fix it?
That is actually, I'm just did that recently to not like a CP book, but to Crimes of Grindelwald. Like I'm like trying to plot out
so many problems with that movie.
I think it's like just missing a first act. Like I'm trying to plot out like a better first act that actually